All right, well, Matt gave me the thumbs up, and we all know that Matt is secretly in charge around here. He keeps everything going and running. So when he gives me the thumbs up, that means it's time to get started. Hope everybody had a good week. It's hard to believe, but we're actually getting towards the halfway point in terms of our plan for the course. So again, if maybe you're just joining us for the first time, welcome. We're reading through the Proverbs during the week, usually 2 to 3 chapters, and encouraging you just like in your own time to make notes of things that stand out to you. Maybe try to commit a couple Proverbs to memory. But the advantage you get, or the most that you'll get from this class, comes from spending a week in 2 to 3 chapters and meditating and reflecting on that. And then when we come here, like today, we're going to talk about chapters 12 through 14 and hit some of the high points within. We're also trying to follow an outline of the book of Proverbs to get a sense of the structure of the book. So, especially the section that we're in, it almost feels like Proverbs is just a random collection of wisdom. But there is a structure to it, and there are different styles of writing in the Proverbs, and so we want to, as best we can, be attentive to that. We finished the discourse on wisdom, and last week we started with chapter 10, Solomon's Proverbs, and we'll spend a couple weeks in there. Just a couple of reminders, the differences in style and content between Solomon's Proverbs and the things we saw in the discourse on wisdom. So these verses seem to read like standalone nuggets or aphorisms, right? The discourse on wisdom is written from the perspective of a father instructing or teaching his son about the pursuit of wisdom, the value of pursuing lady wisdom over lady foolishness, or the strange woman. She's spoken of differently in Proverbs of 4 or 5 different ways. So when we get to Proverbs 10, really through about Proverbs 18, these will seem like sort of randomly compiled, stacked together Proverbs, and they follow generally 2 forms of style. And you probably noticed this in the reading. One is Proverbs that contrast. They're called antithetic Proverbs. So the example would be, the wise do A, or the wise say A, but fools do or say B. And I'd say, especially even for the text we're reading today, and you can see it if you just scan the pages, that's like 90% of what we get in Proverbs, in this section of the Proverbs. But another kind of symmetry that we see is called a synthetic parallel, and it's designed to expand an idea. So instead of contrasting the wise and the foolish, it might say the wise do A, and something good follows. So those aren't super important details, but just things to pay attention to when you're doing the reading. Proverbs 12. So again, this chapter, like if you had to outline it, it would be kind of difficult. But there are certain features, specifically of chapter 12, that suggest there's like a structure to it. Notice that in chapter 12 and verse 1, it says, "Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid." That's what the New American Standard says. And then verse 15, "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man is he who listens to counsel." So the first verse and the middle verse both talk about a wise person being teachable or open to instruction, correction, and it contrasts with the fool who already has his mind made up, doesn't want to be corrected, doesn't want to receive instruction. There are only 2 of those expanding proverbs here in chapter 12, but notice what they include. Verse 14, "A man will be satisfied with good by the fruit of his words, and the deeds of a man's hand will return to him." And then verse 28, this is, again, the middle verse and then the concluding verse. "In the way of righteousness is life, and in its pathway there is no death." So both of these verses, again, one in the middle, one at the end, promise life to those who pursue wisdom, righteousness. And we have one totally unique proverb in this chapter, and it's in verse 9. So it doesn't follow the form of, the wise do A, but the foolish do B. It doesn't expand. It says this: better is he who is lightly esteemed and has a servant than he who honors himself and lacks bread. I don't know, kind of neat little nuggets in here. I just figured I would bring it up so that you might pay attention to the form as you're reading during the week and say, hey, this proverb seems, unique from all the other ones stylistically that we see in the text. So now I actually want to talk about Proverbs 12. And again, we're not going to read verse by verse, but I try to pay attention to some themes or emphases, various emphases that come up multiple times in the chapter. The first is of words having moral weight and consequence. Let's read a couple of these verses. Let's look at 6. Proverbs 12 and verse 6. The words of the wicked lie in wait for blood, but the mouth of the upright will deliver them. Then again, 13 and 14. An evil man is ensnared by the transgression of his lips, but the righteous will escape from trouble. We just read 14, a man will be satisfied with goods by the fruit of his words, and the deeds of a man's hand will return to him. 17 through 19, he who speaks truth tells what is right, but a false witness deceit. There is one who speaks rashly, like the thrust of a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Verse 19, truthful lips will be established forever, but a lying tongue is only for a moment. So see, you can sort of do this when you read the proverb and maybe taking notes. You're like, I'm not sure how I would outline this, but it seems like they're talking about, the Proverbs writer is talking about the importance of our words and the dangers that we can get ourselves into with our tongue. Any thoughts on that or things that you observed? What were some common themes that you observed in this week's reading of chapter 12? Not everybody at once. Good.
I did a study on Proverbs for myself, and I thought, this would really be good to share with my grandchildren. I don't know why I didn't do a study of Proverbs with my children when they're young. I don't think I had it in me, to be that deep, I guess. But I was thinking parts of it anyway are good teaching for home family Bible studies and just to, plant the seed and let God water it. But, how foolishness is a sin. And I was just thinking that we haven't, I don't think, taught those principles quite as well as I think maybe we should have,
Yeah, I think you're right. It's just like Tim said today, sin doesn't make you bad, it makes you dead, right? So it's not as if God's doesn't want us to have fun if we think sin is fun. He's trying to preserve our life, to give us the best life possible. Yes, sir.
Yeah, when I was reading verse 1 and I saw the word stupid, I just found it really challenging to think that the Bible would have the word stupid in it. I mean, it does, and there's no doubt that it's there, but if somebody would have asked me, do you think the word stupid would be in the Bible? No, I don't think so.
Pretty direct, isn't it? Does somebody have a different translation for chapter 12 and verse 1 that reads another word than stupid?
I don't have another word, but I just think it's funny. Who likes correction? I don't, and love discipline. I don't like it. I think we have the opposite reaction. So maybe I'm stupid. And I think I like knowledge, but I don't really like correction.
Yeah.
And
I think you're right.
Correct me, but
I think that's why this really should be harder for us to accept because we naturally don't like correction unless we solicit it. So as I said, I talked about trying to get better at golf. if I really want to get better, I want to talk to somebody who's really good, talk to a local pro and say, do whatever you can to fix my swing and make me better. And those are the times that we like to be corrected or to be guided. But otherwise, it seems annoying or we think, how dare you, Who do you think you are to correct me?
I was going to say, I think part of that is how we don't like correction usually, but there are times when we've been corrected and I have. There's certain situations and it's the way it's done, but we often forget the way we like to be corrected when we go correct to others. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, the best correction I ever saw once, I was in the hospital. My niece had been in a terrible car accident. She was all messed up. And at Tampa General, you don't just get a eye doctor comes in, a whole crew of eye doctors and interns and everybody comes in and they were sticking Q-tips under her eyelashes. There was glass everywhere and they left. They said, the main guy said to the interns or whatever they are, and he said, everything good? And everybody said, yeah, I think so. Then came back about 30 seconds later and he was correcting one. If you see something, you say it. A piece of glass in the back of this young lady's eye could have detrimental effects, and that's the right kind of correction. And he was telling her, don't be shy, speak up, because it could have this effect. And they went back in and stuck this Q-tip. I didn't know you could stick stuff that far in an eye, and pulled out some glass and stuff. But we often correct the way we hate to be corrected. We kind of say you're stupid. That's not the way to start out a correction. That term is in here, but it's not if we want to be successful correcting someone. Stupid is probably not a good word to use.
Yeah, it's a very harsh and direct address there. Any maybe one or two more? Yeah, then we'll go to Sandy.
I had a note in here. One of the things that I personally do with Proverbs is there's 31 Proverbs, and I'll read one, whatever that day is, and do it all along. But a note that I had here, it said, life is hard, but it's harder if you're stupid. So.
Yeah, I have lived that proverb certainly in a number of ways. Cindy?
All right, 2 points. With the stupid comment, I think it's more rooted in the person's pride amongst themselves and where they refuse to like to learn. So in teaching, in learning, you learn what you love to learn, and if you refuse to learn something, you can be taught that for 10 years in a row and you'll never learn it, aka the English language and writing scripts. You take English for 12 years in high school, and some of the high school seniors can't even write 3 paragraphs that makes remote sense. So they didn't want to learn it. So they remain, they're prideful. They don't want to do something. And we as students do the same thing. Now, in regards to what Jeannie was saying with our children, when you parent, or when I always had the authority of God with me. I'm your parent, but God's given me this authority because now I have to take care of you, and I have to make sure that you learn properly. And sometimes it has to be very ground and basic, You need to go water your dog. Go put the water in the bowl and fill up the dog bowl now. Well, Susie did it last time, and in the Bible it says that the godly are concerned for the welfare of their animals. So you need to tell them, you need to go water your dog. Well, why? Because the Bible says so. The godly's concerned for the dog, welfare of your animals. And you just instill the word on them through their interactions. You don't sit down and say, okay, we're going to learn some Proverbs today. Yeah. No, it's just on the tip of your lip, and every time that something happens, this is how you need to be. That was a cutful, hurtful statement, but if you say something healing, let's try to figure out how to do that. So.
Yeah, that's good. There's a lot of good comments on that. Yeah, yes, ma'am.
So I haven't been in the book of Proverbs for quite some time. So last week, during the week, reading through what we talked about last week and stuff, I was thinking about the overall picture, and I said, okay, so we know wisdom comes from God, right? And wisdom is defined as the proper use of knowledge. And then I asked myself, I said, when I read the verses that talked about the foolish person, and I said to my husband, I said, well, there's a lot of people who has the knowledge, right? The same knowledge, but they choose not to use it. And then I asked myself, well, why? Why do people do that? Why do people in Christ choose not to do that? And just to piggyback on what Gary just said about it being too hard, I came up with, okay, because it's too hard. You know, the Bible, for example, some people refuse to take the time to study because it's too hard. It's confusion for them. So, in other words, they choose to respond to Bible verses based on their own understanding. Right. And that also makes them foolish.
You're right. It brings out the circularity of, I really don't want to be knowledgeable or to gain new insight or something. I want to confirm what I already believe, or if it's too difficult, I don't want to have to break down whatever it is I already do to learn something new. Right. Yes, sir.
Yeah, to follow up with what she was just saying, I think it applies. Just scrolling through several different translations, the King James Version says brutish instead of stupid. But I think stupid is more to the point, more easily understandable, and strikes home much better than the word brutish. Yeah. People might kind of overlook that and say, well, I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah. But. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Brutish, I thought, I think I read another translation that just says is lacking in sense, but that seems to really capture it sharply. Yeah, Jeannie has one more.
I became a Christian when I was turning 24. In my life, I was not taught any of the basic right ways of living or lived at home, some good things, but it was pretty worldly home. I knew that I had a lot to learn, and I had a lot to learn. I still, 49 years later, know that I have been a serious student of God's Word, and I still have a lot to learn. I don't understand the mindset of us ever getting to the point where we don't have a lot. We've got it all together and can't be taught or learn a different way. We are disciples of Christ. That means learners, and it is a lifetime thing. So I think we as Christians need to develop the mindset of hungry to learn, hungry to change, hungry to repent, and hungry even to listen to people saying ways that, I don't go around telling everybody how to live and breathe, but I do help people to grow if I see it in a kind way, or I try to, But we've got to get out of that mindset thinking we got it all together, because we don't, and right. We have more to learn.
You're right. Yeah.
Just to add to that, we live in a culture which has changed drastically. I'm 82 years old. I've been through these changes. And I'm telling you, the Bible, even in the Old Testament, warns us to acknowledge the old ways. Just because culture changes doesn't mean it's always good and always right and always God-following. In fact, we know that's not the case. Culture is the world around us. It's controlled by the powers of the air, according to Ephesians. And we need to be very careful as we consider our attitudes about our culture and how we should be standing up against some of this stuff, not just accepting it. Our society today seems like everybody's so on edge for getting their feelings hurt. To call somebody stupid, we wouldn't walk up and say that to somebody. It'd be considered rude. But the Bible does. He tells us who's stupid here. If you hate knowledge, if you hate discipline, you're a stupid person, and you're going to stay that way, regardless of how your culture tells you you ought to feel about that.
Yep. Good points. A lot of good stuff. A lot of really good comments. I want to cover just a couple more themes, and then I actually had planned to ask some more open-ended questions for the rest of the reading. So emphases, first emphasis is our speech has moral weight and consequences. Our thoughts can make the difference not just in our own life, but in someone else's life. So the thoughts, it says in verse 5, the thoughts of the righteous are just, and the counsels of the wicked are deceit. Let's see. Verse 8, a man will be praised according to his insight, but the one of perverse mind will be despised. Verse 20, deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but the counselors of peace have joy. And then, in verse 25, anxiety in a man's heart weighs it down, but a good word makes it glad. A good word makes it happy or at peace, at rest. Another emphasis here is diligence, which was something we discussed at length over the last couple of weeks, trying to figure out, since faith is not mentioned, I think only the term faith is used in the Old Testament about 20 times. Much more so you see terms like diligence or entrusting yourself. And we've also talked about how diligence is just doing the right thing consistently. Our actions produce habits. Our habits produce character. And so the actions that we perform with diligence become habits that reflect something true, most true about us. And there's no exception to that here in the Proverbs. I can't see the notes on my phone as well, so I keep having to look up here. Verse 9, better is he who is lightly esteemed and has a servant than he who honors himself and lacks bread. Ensure that you're not, you don't have to tell everyone how great you are. If you're really that great, you don't have to tell everybody. He who tills his land will have plenty of bread, but he who pursues worthless things lacks sense. This goes back to things we talked about in Proverbs 6 about the sin of, as the New Revised Standard says, the sin of being a lazy bones. That being lazy is not just like a quirky personality trait in Proverbs, but it's a matter of life and death. It's going against one's very nature. And I thought this one was interesting as a point of emphasis. 4 different times it talks about a wise person concealing different things. So as we just said in verse 9, conceal self-honor. Don't have to tell everyone how great you are. Conceals anger. Conceals reckless or rash speech. And then finally, this one I thought was interesting, conceals knowledge. Look in verse 23. A prudent man conceals knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaim folly. There are times where here in the Proverbs it says we should share knowledge, just as it said, insights of another person. Your insights or the insights of a righteous person could benefit the life of another. But it says a prudent man or a wise man conceals knowledge. And I suppose it goes something like this. We don't have to, we can know a lot of things, but we don't have to share everything we know. I've heard it said about sermon construction this way. Like when you bake a cake, you know exactly what goes in the cake. It's all measured and you're doing all the work behind the scenes. And when you feed it to your guests, you don't say, how does the flour taste? Let me tell you about how much sugar I put. There are times where it's best to, even if you have this like penetrating insight, maybe it's best to just be silent. That's another important emphasis of the whole book of Proverbs has been sometimes silence is the best thing we can offer. Now, I hate to ask if there are comments or questions after I just said we should all be silent. But the next chapter, flowing into Proverbs 13, instead of looking at themes, I thought these were some sort of like natural questions that arise in the context of reading Proverbs. Notice in chapter 13 in verse 7, it says, there is one who pretends to be rich but has nothing, and then another pretends to be poor but has great wealth. It's a very interesting, this is more of an observation. There's no real instruction or like a judgment being made about this. But maybe it's meant for us to reflect on this. Is it more honorable to pretend that you're rich or that you're poor? Probably encountered both types of people in our life. Like, you see billionaires or millionaires who walk around and wear, the same brand of Walmart clothes that I wear. And they just don't have a desire to flaunt their wealth. And we all know others who, love to make it seem like they're really wealthy and maybe even try to focus on that presentation to their own financial ruin. This just seems to be an observation that the Proverbs writer makes. The second one I think is a bit more interesting question. What is the relationship between hope and desire? The verses I highlighted here, chapter 13 and verse 2. From the fruit of a man's mouth he enjoys good, but the desire of the treacherous is violent. Verse 12. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but desire fulfilled is a tree of life. Notice desire is kind of neutral. It's neither something bad nor something necessarily good. So what do you think? What are the differences? What are some differences you notice between desire and hope? Yeah, Mike?
I mean, I'm no scholar, but to me, I think of desire as more almost like we talked earlier of the heart. You know, sometimes we can't trust the heart deceives, and hope is sort of that kind of that I don't know if I'd say that long range plan, you know. And I think the trick, we talk about this, and same with the pretending up there in our whatever we call our this generation, whatever you want to say. I hate using those terms because I'm never a fan of the saying everything was better back in the old days, but the whole online presence where everyone say you ever see someone post something, what it looks like on whatever social media and what it is real. You know, they show someone, you know, in Venice on a gondola and there's nobody around, and then they show the shot before they've wiped out all the people and crowds and all that stuff. Or I've been places where someone's blocking and there's just someone standing on the famous stairway and you know, and trying to take these shots, and they're all dressed meticulously and their hair right, and they're making all these people wait, you know, because they're presenting that false image. The desire is everything to be perfect. You know, hope is or I don't know, I guess desire is to really want. I think of it selfish, and hope is more like, you know, more depth, more meaning of things, not the moment, but the you know,
Yeah.
not the destination, the travel, or whatever they say. The getting there is better than the destination. So.
Yeah, I mean, I ask it, you know, genuinely not looking for like a specific answer. I've just sort of been reflecting on this as I'm reading the Proverbs, and it seems like desire is just pretty naturally wanting something, seeking after something. But hope is something stronger because it's desire plus a certain kind of belief or confidence that we can acquire what it is that we desire. So, you know, I might desire some ribs right now. Ribs would be great. But, you know, I'm not hoping for ribs because I don't think we're going to eat ribs today. I don't know. We might. Maybe I should hope for ribs. But, you know, hope seems to be a much stronger kind of sort of what, to Mike's point, it's desire plus a confidence that the thing that we desire can be received. Hope is going to be really important in some of the later Proverbs that we'll talk about, but I just figured I would open that for you to consider. And then, as Jeannie had already mentioned, you know, adversity and sin, foolishness is sin, as she said. Look in 13:4, the soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing. Sort of the image of like drinking salt water. If you're thirsty, it just it's futile to crave, and then by definition to not pursue in order to satisfy that. But the soul of the diligent is made fat, or is rich. Verse 18 and 21, poverty and shame will come to him who neglects discipline, but he who regards correction will be honored. And then verse 21, this is the one I was thinking of. Adversity pursues sinners, but the righteous will be rewarded with prosperity. And so the thought here is, you know, does the foolish person pursue adversity, or does adversity pursue the foolish person? And I guess the answer in Proverbs is yes. Hard times follow as a consequence of inaction and of making poor decisions. But sometimes the order is reversed. I don't know. These are just reflections I had in preparation. I don't know if you had anything to follow. Yes, sir.
So I had a question more than anything else, because I know that in Old Testament times there was what seemed to be a stronger correlation between behavior and physical blessing, and these verses kind of talk about that. Now there's consequences and there's blessings. There's times when your foolishness will have adverse consequences, but I get the feeling from the text that they're talking about there's also inherent blessings. In our modern time, we've come to understand that pursuing Christ can have its own adversity, even though it's the right thing, and it's not that we're being punished, but that we're accepting consequences. And so I'm kind of struggling through that. What's consequence and what's blessing? And I don't know if I'm
Good.
raising a point or
No, you are.
raising
So
confusion.
this is something we mentioned a couple of weeks ago about not isolating these proverbs, because sometimes it seems like, as you said, you do the right thing and you're blessed. Sometimes you do the right thing and you don't get what you think is owed to you. And the Proverbs writer is going to reflect on this later. Why does it seem like the foolish person or the sinful person has advantages that would seem owed to somebody who does the right thing? I think the perfect case in point of this is, look at Jesus Christ, lives the greatest of all human lives and dies the most painful and shameful death possible. And he is the forerunner of our faith. So you're exactly right. He embodies that very principle that seems to be of injustice, sometimes for the righteous. Why is it that the righteous suffer and that fools sometimes seek an advantage? We see both of these mentioned in the Proverbs. And to your point about poverty, that actually comes up. That's going to come up in chapter 14 when we get to the end of this reading. I had, yes, sir, Mr. Hugh.
I found in reading this that it's conflicting, because he'll say here, will get conflicted with something else he says somewhere else. The gist of everything he's talking about isn't carried out in real life, so we can say, oh, well, if you are wise and save your money, things will work out for you. And then people that, like you just talked about, that it doesn't work out for you. And so the more I read these, the more I find it confusing. But compare to that, here's Solomon, who's supposed to be so wise, and now we have Jesus, who's considered a humble man. When Jesus gave a lesson, when you got to the end of the lesson, you knew what he was saying. That's, I think, why he went to parables, because you could say, okay, the lost sheep or the lost coin, the prodigal son. When you got to the end of his statements, you knew what he was saying. With Solomon, who's supposed to be so wise, maybe it's the translation from the Greek, or maybe the philosophy they had in those days. Maybe it wasn't as mature a society, but it just seemed to me that as you read through Proverbs, you kind of become upset, because you're saying, well, that's not the way that is. That's not working that way for me.
Right.
So
I think that's the key, and I think you're right to mention this. The fact that there does seem to be these conflicting ideas is a sign, I think, of the Proverbs writer captures the breadth of human experience. Sometimes you live a really healthy life, you're a marathon runner, and you still get cancer and die. And sometimes you don't ever exercise, you smoke like a freight train for 60 years, and you live to be 100. And it doesn't mean you should live the latter lifestyle in order to pursue a healthy life, or that the former life is unhealthy. It's just, that's sometimes just how the world is. And so that's my answer of why do I think we see kind of both answers here in Proverbs. The wisdom here is it captures that the world can be radically different for one person than it is for another person. But we often try to measure and assess it through our experience. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to comment that initially, when I started reading it, some of it appeared to be confusing, but my husband would say, you have to look with your spiritual eye and not your physical eye. You know, try and get a positive aspect out of what you're reading. So, for example, one of the things that I see is humility. I see a lot of humility in these verses that Solomon is teaching. That's just one example, you know. So it's how we formulate it in our spirit, how we read it in our spirit, how we look at it in our spirit in a more positive way.
That's good. It is important the kind of perspective we bring to these texts and reading it with spiritual eyes versus through the eyes of the flesh. For time's sake, I'm just going to put these up here. These were certain emphases I saw that I thought were very important, repetitive through Proverbs 14 as well. Notice how the fool is portrayed as inflicting harm upon him or herself. It says in 14:1, the wise woman builds her house, but the foolish tears it down with her own hands. It's the image of someone, imagine them living next to each other in the same neighborhood. And this guy over here, the wise man, he's building his house, and his next door neighbor goes out every day and takes another shingle off. With each and every day, one is more complete and filled out, and the other is a little more tattered and in shambles. Verse 3, in the mouth of the foolish is a rod for his back. His own speech is like the self-flagellation. But the lips of the wise will protect them. And then maybe verse 12. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. That's another, handful of these Proverbs verses that we've known for a long time, maybe or memorized. That one really stands out. Another emphasis here, self-control. Having peace within and restraint over yourself is going to make your life easier. Now, you tell someone who's upset, try to relax, You tell someone who's like really anxious, calm down. A 3-year-old girl is crying and you say, stop crying. That has never worked. Trust me, that has never worked. So it's one thing for us to say that, self-control is something we should try to acquire, which we should, but that can be quite difficult. So the people that you meet in this life who have peaceful, grounded lives, that by and large that is rare for the human experience. So we can take something away, learn something from people who are at peace. Notice in verse 15, the naive believes everything, but a sensible man considers his steps. Someone who is grounded. Verses 17 and 18, a quick-tempered man acts foolishly, and a man of evil devices is hated. The naive inherit foolishness, but the sensible are crowned with knowledge. And then finally, I thought this was really important. So in Proverbs, we've been discouraged, as we've seen, from falling into poverty through our own neglect. But just because poverty is something that we shouldn't seek after through laziness, the poor still have dignity, to the writer of the Proverbs. So they're not to be mocked and despised and mistreated. Notice, I think, verse 31, he who oppresses the poor taunts his maker, but he who is gracious to the needy honors him. I think that's an important emphasis. The Proverbs writer does not want us to fall into ruin through our own neglect and lack of discipline, but he also does not want us to despise someone who may be in those circumstances, to show compassion. Those are emphases I saw here. I don't know if you had anything. We've got maybe 3 minutes left. Yes, sir, Mr. Berry.
Yeah, when I think of despising the poor and the life that Jesus lived and how important it was for him to focus his attention on the poor and the people that were marginalized. I mean, that was his way of being, And when you read the Old Testament and they speak of God being slow to anger and full of mercy, and I mean, it's just like a cruciform lifestyle. This is what we're expected to be as followers of Jesus, and Proverbs just goes right along with that.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
Well, when you give advice to somebody, you're hoping to spare them what you may have learned through experience, and that's how maybe you got that wisdom, and you hope that someone you care about can avoid that experience by just listening to you. And some people do and some people don't, and it's almost like an inherent wisdom if you can learn from someone else's words without saying, oh, I don't think that'll happen to me. So when you say you're wise beyond your years, if somebody younger can just take your words and learn from them without having to have the experience, they're wiser than a lot of older people.
That's great. Could save them a lot of time and trouble and heartache just from taking seriously that insight. One last comment? I think I forgot it. Okay, that's fine. You're just going to save it for next week. Really good discussion today. I think these verses are a bit more open or this section of the Proverbs is open to us having this kind of discussion. Excuse me. So next week, we're going to actually read 4 chapters. We're going to read 15 through 18. That sounds like a lot, but it's really not. It's a lot more of the same form, but we'll point out some different areas of emphasis. As always, you guys have great comments and make good notes. And so if anything stands out, bring it so that we can learn together, and hope everybody has a good week. Thanks.